Hello everyone, my name is Jean-Luc Sensenbrenner. I'm a senior in the college majoring in interdisciplinary studies and minoring in cognitive science, and I'm very excited to be sharing my thesis project with you today. As a student in the interdisciplinary studies program, I merged the fields of psychology, neuroscience, and philosophy, taking advantage of the tools and theories of these three disciplines to come to a multifaceted understanding of the brain and mind. My thesis is the culmination of almost 2 years of mentored research at the intersection of these disciplines, specifically focused on the ethical ramifications of technological interfaces with the human brain in clinical populations. My thesis is entitled Capturing Consciousness: Technical, Clinical, and Ethical Challenges in the Neurotechnological Assessment, Monitoring, and Treatment of Patients with Disorders of Consciousness. It explores a patient population at the margins of modern medicine, patients in states of altered consciousness who are unable to communicate with the world. These states are collectively known as disorders of consciousness and include coma, the vegetative state, or unresponsive wakefulness syndrome, and the minimally conscious state. Each one of these diagnostic labels describes a unique pathophysiological state, and taken together, they represent an attempt to clinically define the spectrum of human unconsciousness. This thesis project is the product of a unique collaboration, not only across disciplines, but across campuses. On the main campus, I benefited from the expertise of Dr. Adam Green from the Department of Psychology, an expert in neuroscientific methods and specialist in the neuroscience of creativity, and Dr. Bryce Hubner of the Department of Philosophy, an expert in philosophy of mind with extensive knowledge of the methods of cognitive science. Now, on the medical campus, I sought the expertise of Dr. James Giordano, chief of the Neuroethics Studies program at the Pellegrino Center for Clinical Bioethics, an expert in neuroethics with particular experience in the ethical ramifications of clinical neurotechnologies. My research has shown that the current state of acute and long-term clinical care of patients with disorders of consciousness fails to match the complexity of these disorders, leading to undesirably high levels of misdiagnosis, as high as 40%, poor prognostic sensitivity, and unfavorable functional outcomes. Not only does this represent a shortcoming in clinical care, but also a catastrophic failure to protect the needs and rights of this highly vulnerable patient population. Current and emerging neurotechnologies used to assess, access, and affect the brains of individuals with disorders of consciousness carry enormous potential to revolutionize clinical practices and usher in an era of innovation focused directly on improving patient outcomes. For example, imaging technologies like magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, can not only be used to diagnose and monitor these patients, but also to measure brain signals that can serve as a proxy measure of their consent to procedures. Despite fervent calls for their adoption, the promise and potential of such technologies have yet to bear their fruit in standardized clinical practice. Given that many of these patients lack communicative ability and therefore cannot provide informed consent, clinicians remain wary of implementing novel or otherwise ambitious treatment protocols. However, within these protocols lies the key to understanding the brains of these patients, and perhaps even decoding their wishes. In this light, my thesis argues for a positive reappraisal of the costs and benefits of implementing clinical neurotechnologies and proposes a roadmap for their adoption that balances the needs, obligations, and desires of relevant stakeholders and shareholders. Ultimately, I argue for the creation of an accelerated and dedicated bench-to-bedside pipeline, which would shrink the gap between research development and real-world clinical care. Not only would this framework be more expedient, but since it is designed to directly improve patient outcomes, it represents a significant ethical advantage over current methods. In reflecting on this experience, the biggest challenge I faced was sufficiently narrowing down the scope of my inquiry to make it suitable for a thesis project. Particularly because my major spans multiple disciplines, finding a unique niche at the intersection of these disciplines ended up not being enough. Ultimately, I had to find a niche within a niche. In retrospect, this was definitely a good problem to have, since it forced me to explore my chosen issue with the depth that it deserves. And my mentors were invaluable in pushing me to further and further refine my ideas. In fact, I actually changed topics after I had already started work on my thesis, because my mentors had helped me identify that it was too broad. At first, of course, I was hesitant because it meant I had to start again from scratch, but I took a leap of faith in my mentors, and it truly paid off. As an added benefit, it pushed me to apply principles and methods that I already knew of from other avenues of my research, revealing to me new and exciting connections that I wouldn't have otherwise discovered. Ultimately, my thesis represents the tip of the iceberg of my research experience, and I hope it's the first step on a journey of exploration. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Cook, head of the Interdisciplinary Studies program here at Georgetown, for enabling me to pursue this self-designed course of study. This program has come to define my Georgetown academic experience, and I can't imagine it any other way. To any students out there with interests that don't fit within the boxes of traditional majors and programs, I cannot recommend this path enough. Thank you.